How to solve any problem in life. Think clear, stay strong, win every time. Right now, as you're listening to this, there are problems in your life that feel impossible to solve. Maybe it's a relationship that's falling apart, a career that's stuck, financial stress that keeps you awake at night, or personal habits that you just can't seem to break. You've tried everything you can think of, but nothing works. The problems keep coming back, sometimes stronger than before. Here's what I'm about to tell you that will change everything. The reason you're stuck isn't because your problems are too complex or because you're not smart enough. It's because you've never been taught how to actually solve problems. You've been using trial and error, hoping something will work. But hope is not a strategy. What I'm about to share with you is a systematic approach that works for any problem, no matter how big, how complex, or how long you've been dealing with it. This isn't motivation. This isn't positive thinking. This is a step-by-step framework that transforms chaos into clarity and obstacles into opportunities. By the end of this video, you'll have a mental toolkit that most people will never possess. You'll know exactly how to break down any challenge, eliminate confusion, and execute solutions that actually work. The difference between people who thrive and people who survive isn't luck. It's their ability to solve problems faster and more effectively than everyone else. Chapter 1. The reason most people stay stuck in the same problems year after year isn't because they lack intelligence or resources. It's because they've been programmed to think about problems in completely the wrong way. From childhood, we're taught that problems are bad things that happen to us, obstacles that block our path, or signs that something is wrong with our lives. This mindset is not just incorrect, it's destructive. Let me share with you a fundamental truth that will shift everything. Problems are not your enemy. Problems are information. Every challenge you face is your life's way of giving you data about what needs to change, what skills you need to develop, or what direction you need to move. The moment you stop seeing problems as attacks and start seeing them as intelligence, everything changes. Think about the most successful people you know or have studied. Do they have fewer problems than everyone else? Absolutely not. They have more problems, bigger problems, and more complex problems. The difference is that they've learned to see problems as fuel rather than barriers. They understand that every problem solved makes them stronger, smarter, and more capable of handling the next challenge. This is why poor people stay poor and rich people get richer. It's not about money, it's about problem-solving capacity. Poor people avoid problems, complain about problems, and wait for someone else to solve their problems. Rich people seek out problems, embrace difficult challenges, and build their wealth by solving problems that others won't touch. But here's where most people go wrong. They think that having a positive attitude about problems is enough. They try to reframe their mindset without actually developing the skills to solve anything. Mindset matters, but mindset without method is just wishful thinking. The truth is that problem solving is a learnable skill. It's not a talent you're born with or without. It's a systematic process that can be taught, practiced, and mastered. Just like you can learn to drive a car or play an instrument, you can learn to solve problems with precision and confidence. Most people approach problems reactively. Something goes wrong and they immediately start trying solutions without understanding what they're actually dealing with. It's like trying to fix a car engine without knowing how engines work. You might get lucky occasionally, but most of the time you'll make things worse. The elite problem solvers, the people who seem to have solutions for everything, follow a process. They don't just jump into action. They don't just think positive thoughts. They use a systematic approach that breaks down complexity into manageable pieces, identifies root causes instead of symptoms, and generates solutions that actually address the core issue. This process has 4 fundamental stages, and every problem you'll ever face, no matter how unique it seems, will follow these same patterns. First is problem identification, where you learn to see what you're actually dealing with instead of what you think you're dealing with. Second is root cause analysis, where you dig deeper than surface symptoms to find the real source of the issue. Third is solution generation, where you create multiple options instead of settling for the first idea that comes to mind. Fourth is implementation and optimization, where you execute your solution and refine it based on results. But before we dive into this framework, you need to understand the mental traps that keep most people stuck. These are the invisible barriers that prevent clear thinking and effective action. The first trap is emotional hijacking. When problems arise, especially unexpected ones, your brain's emotional centers activate before your logical thinking centers. You feel stressed, angry, frustrated, or panicked, and these emotions cloud your judgment. You make decisions based on how you feel rather than what the situation actually requires. Elite problem solvers have trained themselves to pause, breathe, and shift from emotional reaction to analytical thinking. The second trap is assumption addiction. Your brain is constantly making assumptions to save energy. It fills in gaps with information from past experiences, even when those experiences aren't relevant to the current situation. You assume you know what the problem is before you've properly investigated. You assume certain solutions won't work before you've tested them. These assumptions limit your options and keep you trapped in old patterns. The third trap is solution attachment. You fall in love with your first idea and become emotionally invested in making it work, even when evidence shows it's not the right approach. You waste time, energy, and resources trying to force a solution instead of stepping back and generating better options. The fourth trap is perfectionist paralysis.
You wait for the perfect solution before taking any action. You overanalyze, over-research, and over-plan while the problem gets worse. You convince yourself that you need more information, more time, or more resources before you can move forward. Understanding these traps is crucial because they operate below your conscious awareness. You don't realize you're falling into them until you're already stuck. But once you know what to look for, you can catch yourself and redirect your thinking. The most important thing to understand is that problem solving is not about eliminating all problems from your life. That's impossible and would actually make you weaker. Problems are like physical exercise for your mind. The more challenging problems you solve, the stronger your problem-solving muscles become. Chapter 2. Before you can solve any problem effectively, you must first understand what you're actually dealing with. This sounds obvious, but it's the step that trips up most people. They react to symptoms instead of addressing root causes. They solve the wrong problem perfectly instead of solving the right problem adequately. Problem identification is both an art and a science. It requires you to step back from your immediate emotional reaction and observe the situation with the detachment of a detective. You're not trying to fix anything yet. You're trying to understand what's really happening. The first technique is called the 5-layer method. Most people see only the surface layer of their problems. They see the argument with their spouse, the difficult boss, the financial stress, or the health issue. But these are often just the visible manifestations of deeper issues. Layer 1 is the surface problem, which you immediately notice or what triggered your stress. Layer 2 is the pattern, how often this type of situation occurs and under what circumstances. Layer 3 is the underlying system, the environmental or structural factors that allow this problem to exist. Layer 4 is the root behavior, the habits, decisions, or actions that created the conditions for this problem. Layer 5 is the core belief or assumption that drives the behavior. Let me give you an example. Surface problem. You're always running late and it's causing stress at work and in relationships. Pattern. This happens most mornings and whenever you have important meetings. Underlying system. You don't have consistent routines. You underestimate how long things take, and you try to pack too much into your schedule. Root behavior. You say yes to too many commitments, and you don't plan buffer time. Core belief. You believe that being busy makes you important, and you're afraid that saying no will disappoint people. Once you identify the core belief, you can see that this isn't really a time management problem. It's a boundary and self-worth problem. No amount of time management techniques will solve it permanently until you address the underlying belief system. The second technique is problem mapping.
You're going to write down everything connected to your problem, no matter how tangentially related it might seem. Start with the problem in the center of a page, then branch out with all the factors that contribute to it, influence it, or are affected by it. Include people involved, environmental factors, timing issues, resource constraints, emotional impacts, and long-term consequences. Don't judge or filter anything at this stage. You're creating a visual map of the problem's ecosystem. This technique reveals connections you wouldn't normally see. You might realize that your relationship problem is connected to work stress, which is connected to financial pressure, which is connected to career dissatisfaction, which is connected to unclear life goals. What seemed like separate problems are actually different symptoms of the same underlying issue. The third technique is perspective shifting. You're going to examine your problem from multiple viewpoints. How would your problem look to someone who loves you? How would it look to someone who doesn't care about you at all? How would it look to someone from a completely different culture or time period? How would it look to someone who's already solved a similar problem? Each perspective reveals different aspects of the situation. The person who loves you might see self-imposed limitations you don't notice. The objective observer might see simple solutions you're overlooking because you're too emotionally invested. The cultural outsider might see assumptions you're making that aren't actually true or necessary. The fourth technique is timeline analysis. Map out how your problem developed over time. When did you first notice it? What was happening in your life when it started? How has it changed or evolved? What have you already tried and what were the results? This historical perspective often reveals patterns you've missed. You might discover that your problem always gets worse during certain seasons, after specific types of events, or when you're dealing with particular stressors. These patterns give you clues about underlying causes and potential solutions. The fifth technique is impact assessment. You're going to quantify the real cost of this problem in your life, not just the obvious costs, but the hidden ones too. What is it costing you in time, money, energy, relationships, opportunities, health, and peace of mind? What would your life look like if this problem didn't exist? What becomes possible when you solve it? This isn't about making yourself feel bad. It's about creating urgency and motivation. When you fully understand what your problem is really costing you, you'll be more committed to finding a solution. The sixth technique is resource inventory.
List everything you have available to address this problem. Include your skills, knowledge, experience, relationships, financial resources, time, energy, and any tools or systems you can access. Also include resources you could potentially access if needed. Most people underestimate their available resources. They focus on what they don't have instead of leveraging what they do have. This inventory helps you see possibilities you might have overlooked. The final technique in problem identification is constraint identification. What are the real limitations you're working within? Which constraints are actual facts and which are assumptions you're making? Which constraints can be changed, worked around, or eliminated entirely? For example, you might assume you can't change careers because you have a mortgage, but is that actually true? Could you reduce expenses, increase income gradually, or find a transition path that doesn't require an immediate income drop? Challenge every constraint to determine if it's real or imaginary. By the end of this identification process, you should have a completely different understanding of your problem than when you started. You'll see it as part of a larger system rather than an isolated incident. You'll understand the deeper patterns and root causes. You'll have clarity about what's really at stake and what resources you have available. This clarity is the foundation for everything that follows. You cannot solve a problem you don't understand, and you cannot understand a problem you haven't properly investigated. Once you've identified what you're actually dealing with, the next step is to find the root cause. This is where most people fail. They treat symptoms instead of addressing the source. They put band-aids on problems that require surgery.
They solve the same problem over and over because they never eliminate what's creating it. Root cause analysis is like being a detective. You're looking for evidence, following clues, and building a case based on facts rather than assumptions. You're going deeper than the obvious explanations to find what's really driving the situation. The first method is called the 5 whys technique. You start with your problem statement and ask why it's happening. Then you ask why that reason is happening. You continue asking why 5 times or until you reach a root cause that you can actually control or influence. Let's say your problem is that you're not saving money despite earning a decent income. Why aren't you saving money? Because you spend everything you earn. Why do you spend everything you earn? Because you have a lot of monthly expenses. Why do you have so many monthly expenses? Because you've committed to subscriptions, payments, and lifestyle choices that consume your entire income. Why did you make those commitments? Because you wanted to enjoy your money and you thought you'd start saving later when you earned more. Why did you think you'd save later instead of now? Because you believe that happiness comes from spending money on experiences and things, and you're afraid that saving means depriving yourself. Now you can see that the root cause isn't a budgeting problem or an income problem. It's a belief system about money and happiness. Until you address that belief system, no budgeting technique will create lasting change. The second method is systems thinking. Every problem exists within a system of interconnected parts. To find the root cause, you need to understand how these parts influence each other. Draw out the system that surrounds your problem. If your problem is poor health, your system might include your daily schedule, work, stress, social environment, family habits, available time, knowledge about nutrition and exercise, emotional coping mechanisms, and social pressures. Look for the leverage points in this system, the places where small changes can create big results. You might discover that your health problem isn't caused by lack of willpower or knowledge. It might be caused by a work schedule that doesn't allow time for meal preparation, which leads to eating fast food, which creates energy crashes, which leads to caffeine dependence, which disrupts sleep, which increases stress, which makes healthy choices even harder. The leverage point might be negotiating a different work schedule or finding ways to prepare healthy meals in advance. Attacking the problem at this systemic level is much more effective than trying to rely on willpower alone. The third method is pattern recognition. Look at your history with this type of problem. When else have you experienced something similar? What were the common factors? What was different about the times you successfully handled it versus the times you struggled? Let's say you have a pattern of starting projects enthusiastically but never finishing them. Look at all the projects you've started. What did they have in common? Were they too ambitious? Did you lack a clear plan? Did you get distracted by new opportunities? Did you lose motivation when the initial excitement wore off? Did you lack accountability or support systems? You might discover that your root cause isn't laziness or discipline. It might be that you consistently underestimate the time and effort required, or that you choose projects based on fantasy rather than realistic assessment of your capacity and interest level. The fourth method is environmental analysis. Your problems don't exist in a vacuum. They're influenced by your physical environment, social environment, and information environment. What in your surroundings is contributing to or maintaining this problem? If your problem is procrastination, look at your workspace. Is it cluttered and distracting? Are you trying to work in the same space where you relax and entertain yourself? Are you surrounded by people who also procrastinate? Are you consuming media that reinforces limiting beliefs about productivity? Sometimes the root cause is as simple as environmental design that makes the wrong choices easier than the right ones. Changing your environment can eliminate the need for willpower entirely. The fifth method is emotion tracking. Many problems are driven by unresolved emotions or emotional patterns that operate below conscious awareness.
Start paying attention to what you're feeling before, during, and after your problem occurs. If your problem is overeating, track not just what you eat, but what you're feeling when you reach for food. Are you actually hungry, or are you stressed, bored, lonely, or celebrating? Are you eating to avoid dealing with something else? Are you using food to regulate emotions that you don't know how to handle directly? The root cause of overeating is rarely hunger. It's usually an emotional regulation strategy that worked at some point, but is now creating more problems than it solves. The sixth method is assumption challenging. List all the assumptions you're making about your problem and systematically challenge each one. What if the opposite were true? What if your assumption is only partially true? What if it's true in some contexts but not others? If your problem is feeling stuck in your career, you might assume that changing direction would require starting over completely, that you're too old to make a change, that you don't have the right connections, or that you can't afford a temporary income reduction. Challenge each assumption. Is starting over really necessary, or could you transition gradually? Are there examples of people who made successful changes at your age or older? Are connections really required, or are there other ways to enter a new field? Many problems persist because we accept limitations that aren't actually real. Challenging your assumptions opens up possibilities you couldn't see before. The seventh method is stakeholder analysis. Who else is affected by your problem? Who benefits from the current situation staying the same? Who would be impacted if you solved it? Sometimes problems persist because solving them would require other people to change, and they're resisting that change, consciously or unconsciously. If your problem is working too many hours, consider who benefits from your overwork. Does your boss rely on your willingness to handle extra responsibilities? Does your family depend on the overtime income? Do you get validation from being seen as indispensable? Are you avoiding personal relationships or responsibilities by staying busy with work? Understanding these dynamics helps you see why change feels difficult and what you'll need to address beyond just managing your own time better. The final method is resource gap analysis. Compare what you need to solve this problem with what you currently have. The gap between these two things often reveals the root cause. You might think you need more time, money, or knowledge, but the real gap might be in your beliefs about what's possible, your willingness to ask for help, or your ability to prioritize effectively. Root cause analysis takes patience and honesty. You have to be willing to look past comfortable explanations to find uncomfortable truths. You have to be willing to take responsibility for your part in creating or maintaining the problem, even when there are external factors involved. But this process is liberation. When you find the real root cause, you stop wasting time on solutions that can't work. You stop repeating the same patterns. You gain the power to create lasting change because you're finally addressing what actually needs to be fixed. Chapter 4. Now that you understand your problem and have identified its root cause, it's time to generate solutions. This is where most people's creativity and strategic thinking either shines or fails them completely. The difference between people who find breakthrough solutions and people who stay stuck using the same ineffective approaches comes down to how they generate and evaluate options. Most people generate solutions the wrong way. They go with the first idea that comes to mind, usually something they've tried before or something obvious that everyone else would think of. They limit themselves to solutions that feel comfortable or familiar. They don't push past their initial thoughts to find more creative and effective possibilities. Elite problem solvers approach solution generation systematically. They use specific techniques to break out of conventional thinking and explore possibilities that others miss. They generate multiple options before evaluating any of them. They separate the creative phase from the critical phase to avoid shutting down promising ideas too early.
The first technique is brainstorming with constraints. Instead of trying to think of any possible solution, you're going to brainstorm solutions within specific parameters. This might seem limiting, but constraints actually boost creativity by forcing your brain to think differently. Set different constraint scenarios. What if you had unlimited money, but only 1 week to solve this? What if you had no money, but unlimited time? What if you could only use resources you already have? What if you had to solve this in a way that also helped someone else? What if you had to solve it without anyone knowing you were working on it? Each constraint forces you to consider different angles and possibilities. The solution